Those of you who are within sight of the track at the moment, if you can tear your eyes away from the St Trinian girls, will see some of our Festival of Motoring celebrating, well, for those of you who walked in through the main entrance, celebrating 70 years since the foundation of British Railways from the private railway companies with a steam engine by the main gate, but also out on the circuit celebrating a number of anniversaries, not least of which is for the FX3 taxis, and we've got a whole selection of different taxis through the era in our British Transport Parade this morning and every morning, Barry.
Indeed, and 70th anniversary of the inception of the Goodwood circuit, the very first time it was used for competition. Yep. So, as you say, a lot of anniversaries. The taxis celebrated 70 years of the FX3, as Martin said, but you can see some of the taxis there with the open landaulette go back way, way, way beyond then, and those were the standard fodder, if you like, for taxis around the capital, and then when the FX3 was launched, it all changed.
3-litre Rover police car ready to make sure that all the drivers' knowledge is up to spec. We've got a whole host of various different delivery vehicles as well, including, you will see the electric Harrods van. Now these Austins, Austin was produced, Herbert Austin was kind of encouraged against his better judgment to supply chassis for the London taxicab trade. Back in the early 1930s, predominantly taxis were made on a French-built chassis, but because there were punitive import duties imposed at the beginning of the Depression, those became very uneconomical. Mann & Overton was the company that predominantly sold London taxicabs. They started that business in 1906. By mid-1920s, they were supplying pretty much 80% of all the cabs in London. And the French-built Unix chassis, originally French-built, they actually started manufacturing them in London as well, but they became uneconomic, and so Herbert Austin was persuaded to supply Austin chassis, originally from a heavy 12.4, to produce those landaulette cabs. 3 standard shaped bodies were offered by 3 different manufacturers, and the original one, which was a very high upright looking device, you'll see, known as the high lot or the top hat cab, because back in the 1920s it was considered to be important that customers could ride in their cab with their top hat still on. That became less important through the 1930s, and a slightly lower, more aerodynamic version of the car was produced. What you're looking at on camera at the moment is the FX3. Now this is the sort of post-war closed cab, Barry, with that very familiar no passenger seat beside the driver, but the open luggage compartment.
For the cases sitting to the left of the driver. Beardmore also rivaled the FX3. Beardmore taxis were very much in production as well, built in smaller numbers, and they're a very original Dennis fire engine for the Borough of Hoe, so just down the road. You can see the smiles on the faces of the people here. The little Z-type post office van as well has just rolled past our commentary point. These vehicles, over 50 of them, taxis predominantly, but then we can move into trucks and commercial vehicles. Over 50 of them will do 2 parade laps of the circuit, and it really is a sight. There you can see, and Morris Commercial on the left there, that became synonymous with Brook Bond Tea. And there, the tower vehicle, which was used in London to maintain the overhead cables for the tram and the trolleybus network, and out in the country for trimming the trees for the double-deckers to go through, and pre-hydraulics. That was cable operated, that tower, and you stood on there and it rattled up in a square-shaped telescopic fashion.
To be honest, I don't think we need to show too many TV producers that, because I can see that they can immediately imagine that a modern hoist would be a perfect commentary position, because it would be cheaper than hiring a full-time one. I can just imagine being stuck on the top of one of those. Well, you can see the London taxis. We saw the 3-litre Rover there. We also saw Mark II Jag police car. There's a Triumph Herald police car in there. No Morris Minor, which I'm very disappointed at, because obviously almost every Panda car in the early 1960s was a white and blue Morris Minor. Some of those still exist. In fact, and coming up behind is a Wolesley police car, which I
690.
followed on the way here. It was on the back of a trailer, but even that was looked fairly big on the narrow lanes around.
In the back of the shot earlier, we saw a great big Thornycroft. These are names that have disappeared. Guy, Thornycroft, Scammell. Where did they all go?
Well, there's a great view of the tower truck, or the
it is, yes.
for fixing the trolley bus wires and trimming the trees.
And you can see how that winds up, cable operated, so the cables sort of get winched up and away it goes. Big toolbox in the back, but that's
a cranking handle. So that. It's actually, look, you see the chain on the inside, the screw on the inside to wind it up. So that's actually like your scissors jack.
Done by hand.
Yeah. That's not for the soft-handed among us. Bedford OB bus in the background. You can see in that two-tone livery. And right at the back, a series of double deckers. Now we have vehicles being added to this by the minute. To this parade that we have not got any notification of what we're going to see, so you have to bear with us as we separate the wheat from the chaff here. Barry,
GPO Telegraph boys on their BSA Bantams, and this the Shuttleworth special from the film The TT Races. What
a fabulous device! What a fabulous device!
Just an amazing thing. When I'm cleaning windows. A regular here at the Goodwood Revival.
Well, congratulations to everybody on your turnout this morning. Just from the people that we've walked past on the way into the commentary booth this morning, and from what we're seeing on camera, again, you know, when the revival first started, the idea that everybody would come dressed as they would have done was quite a novelty. You know, 20 years on, it's still the only race meeting where that happens. You go to the Silverstone Classic, everybody's wearing modern clothes. You go to the historic Le Mans or historic Monaco, everybody's wearing modern clothes. It's only here at Goodwood where you get a chance to live the entire thing as a fan, as a spectator, as a viewer. And for those of you who came this morning in normal attire and thought, well, no, really, not everybody is going to dress up, are they? Pop back over the road. If you're in jeans and a T-shirt, pop back over the road, because there are so many stands there. Or down the shopping street here, you can turn up, you know, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, naked, and you don't need to steal anybody else's boots. You can go and buy your own.
Everybody entered into the fashion sense, that's for sure. Right at the back, the MGA police car. There's a Scammell there. I noticed the Leyland tower truck. Their beautiful Bentley, and a six-wheel drive.
And was that an Alvis?
Good question.
Crikey.
Our very own George Formby at the back of the BSA. Now that looks like
that's much too big for an Alvis, isn't it? Yeah, that has truck.
Looks like an AEC Matador. When I get a closer look at it, I'll be able to see. But of course, the military needed heavy recovery equipment.
Yep.
In case they were in trouble.
I was going to say, it does look like it should have been pulling a truck, except with the yellow roof, I'm thinking it probably wasn't pulling tanks. It was probably pulling aircraft. It's another of our police cars being shuffled further back down the pack. It's not a police Jag, it's a standard Jag, so there's probably some cops and robbers going on here. Oh, there is a Morris Minor at the back of the field as well, so my day is complete. There is your S-Type.
It is.
Which, of course, was the development in between with the independent rear suspension that then went on to the XJ range between the Mark II Jag with its live rear axle and the XJ series.
And taking
XJ6s.
a bit of the styling from the Mark X in the smaller
yes,
version.
well, yes, exactly. I mean, if you want to see how a family line develops, you start with the XKs, you go through the Mark I, the Mark II, the Mark X, and then the 420G, and then you get into the XJs, and that is just basically one shape morphing over 2 decades. Triumph Herald with its, that's an 1100 Triumph Herald, the first shape with the hooded cowl, which disappeared over the headlights when the 1360 came out. It's a more aerodynamic bonnet.
And we are off, ladies and gentlemen.
We are off.
Our British Transport Parade is off on its 2 laps. The Morris Commercial van on the left,
Wonder who's got the meter
Beardmore
running.
taxis,
Yeah.
the FX3s, the pre-war taxis.
Now the Beardmore, you can see the blue and white taxi there early up in the as they come past you. That's a Beardmore with a more upright grille. The Austin's clearly with the Austin script on the front. Yeah, there's a high-top Austin taxi, and the FX3 is coming through. Chrome grille one there. Little Austin 7 saloon, box saloon, fully laden for a trip. I don't know where, to the lakes probably.
Nicknamed the Peanut, those little ones. Austin
Absolutely
Peanut.
gorgeous.
Wonderful.
748 cc. That really is the car that got Britain motoring, isn't it? You know, with the Fiat Topolino or the Citroen 2CV, but that is the car that got Britain motoring.
That and then the Ford Model Y, which
Yeah.
was Britain's first 100-pound production car
Yeah.
in 1936.
And of course, from there, from the 750cc engine became very popular, the Austin 7 to be tuned post-war for racing. Lots of engineers and racers cut their teeth with Austin 7s, not least Bruce Mclaren, of course, very famous for racing one as his first race car, and then gave birth to the 750 Motor Club, which is another hotbed of engineering expertise.
And all that despite the fact they only had a 2-bearing crank.
Yes.
Incredible. And how they didn't break, well, of course they did when they started to beef them up a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that was all part of it, how to make something that wasn't supposed to do that. That's where the engineering, that's where you learned your engineering, by breaking things, fixing it, and then try to fix it a second time. Oh, what a beautiful morning. Aboard the Charabang. Now that is not going to be a quiet ride, is it? With St Trinian's girls taking to the upper deck.
The 6x4 is a 1944 Scammell, owned and driven by Brian Carter. The Matador, a later version.
Yeah.
But it is some beast. The Ellie Velocet, the little police noddy bike as it became called. Our George Formby look-alike on the Shuttleworth Special. And he has a beautiful set of false teeth to fit the part. They really, really do make him look like George Formby, and he has a wonderful Burnley accent as well.
Now you can also see coming past you a Worthington's Pale Ale truck. Now just occasionally these vehicles used to turn up. My grandmother lived in Kew Gardens, and just around the corner from them was where they kept a mini-based orange, the Outspan Orange car, which looked like an orange with a little window in the front to allow you to drive it on a very much shortened mini chassis. So I used to see that quite regularly when I was a child.
Getting lots of abuse from the St Trinian's girls.
Kel Surprise. That's because Arthur Daly's not
They're going
Flash
down
Harry's not there to rein them in.
They're going down to a hockey match at Rodie.
Yeah. I think there may be blood and broken bones before the end of the day, if that's the case.
Now that is a beautiful bus.
Speaking
they're
of
a V8 Pilot.
Yep.
Ford V8 Pilot, like an overgrown prefect, with the side valve V8 Ford, which had a long life in service and was used in a variety of motor cars, and was not changed a great deal when they went to overhead valve. The V8 Ford layout, very, very similar.
A whole host more V8 Fords and Chevrolets on track during the course of the day, making an awful lot more noise and a fairly large amount more horsepower as well. A great opportunity for the owners of these vehicles to come down to Goodwood and blend in seamlessly. There's not too many places where you'd walk past a Beardmore taxi and go, oh, it's another Beardmore taxi. Anywhere else, it would absolutely stand out. But here, somehow, it just blends in perfectly. And again, hats off to everybody at Goodwood for producing yet another astonishing backdrop to a weekend of motor racing activity.
Celebrating 70 years then of the inception of the nationalised British Railways, 1948, and 70 years of the FX3 taxi, and 70 years of the inauguration of the Goodwood Motor Circuit. Shuttleworth Special, and an exact replica of the bike that featured in the film The TT Races with George Formby.
George Formby at the TT. That's quite a thought, isn't it?
It is.
When I'm lapping mountain.
Triumph Herald police car. Look, that's really, really smart one, isn't it?
It's absolutely gorgeous. I don't think I've seen a Triumph Herald police car before, so my day is complete. The 3-litre Rover comes past us with the sirens on. Now what we need is a Wolesley with the bell going at the front. That's very much more
indeed
1950s than the 3-litre Rover. Triumph Herald as well from, what's that, 66?
And on a serious note, Martin, you know, we in the British Isles are unique in that we have this wonderful collection of vehicles, largely due to the fact that, dare I say, we were never invaded. You know, so the stuff has stayed around, and other nations were less fortunate. So.
Well, you look at some of the production numbers, particularly for things like an FX3, and actually Ed Foster this morning from Goodwood was talking about the difficulties of finding early FX4s, the much more modern taxi that has continued right up until, well, built by car bodies in Coventry from the 60s through into this century, and has now become the Metro cab and so on. Trying to find one from the 60s, one of the early FX4s, is all but impossible because they were not quite disposable, but once it had...
To a penny.
Yeah, once it had passed its serviceable life, as a London cab, then, you know, they're used in various other cities, but so many cities didn't demand a London cab that you could use a normal vehicle. They were, well, broken down, rusted away and thrown away.
I wonder if Marcus can hear us. Marcus, do you have a tear in your eye over there at St Mary's?
No, I have the sun in my eyes, in fact. And the bus is going through with these Trinidad girls waving from... they're spread out all the way along the top deck and the bottom deck as well. Sort of each one to a seat, enjoying a window view of this wonderful track. We've got the Comedy Brothers, the Omidi Brothers, down there with their roadworks, all them they're waving friendly in a friendly gesture to the marshals. And Peter Chubb in that wonderful Lancashire Constabulary
Marcus,
MGA at the back.
If you're getting withdrawal symptoms because we're missing our Messerschmitt Kabinenroller, it is here. It's a static display. I went to see it.
Oh, after Lippenside, fantastic.
Wonderful.
Great
But what a
stuff.
great display.
Yeah, amazing. And the full gamut, the little Harrods van called live, that great Hardy engineering van as well. Leyland is quite something too. Beautiful.
There, the Leyland tower truck. Leyland, of course, built Leyland in Lancashire. They were then all gobbled up. They gobbled up Guy trucks that were made in Wolverhampton. Leyland grew and grew and grew, and then amalgamated with DAF, and the brand as an independent brand sadly is no more, as is the fate of so much of the British motor industry. It's been amalgamated, consumed, merged, call it what you like. But the independent brands that you and I knew, Martin, have been, well, they've vanished largely.
Yes, predominantly, and because predominantly they were manufacturing for one small market, and despite post-war, you know, export or die being really important to get in foreign currency, actually, once they survived the 50s and got into the 60s, that became less and less the remit for British car manufacturers, and unfortunately they were unable to really invest in more modern or equally modern machinery, and particularly factories, to match some of the newer German rivals and continental rivals, and they didn't have a marketplace the size of the American giants. Now, even the American giants, even the big three, weren't immune to market forces. I mean, Ford in the US are reducing their input now to a single car. They will make one car, not one actual specific item, but only one model of car next year. That's Ford.
Yeah, an interesting point you were making there, Barry, about the Leyland and DAF tie-up. I mean, DAF sold their car division out to Volvo in the 70s, and then the truck division went a similar way. And I was at the DAF Museum in Eindhoven in Holland last week, in the old factory, absolutely fantastic in the middle of town. That was really, really brilliant to see. And if you remember, you were talking about the proliferation of the motor industry back in the sort of 60s and 70s, in the back of your weekly Autocar magazine, there were all the lists of the new models and all the prices for the different specifications of models. And there were pages on pages on pages of them. And now the number of manufacturers has shrunk to a really small number, probably I don't know, 20 or something like that. It used to be 3 times that.
And of course, you know, you look at somebody the size of Renault, somebody the size of Nissan, and effectively it is now basically the same company. Vauxhall Opel in Europe being bought by PSA. So it's economy of scale, the whole thing, you know, in the up until about the 1970s or 80s, you could manufacture a small production run, but now you just can't and keep it economical. So that applies as much to commercial vehicles and everything else as it does to motor cars. So everything has the same underpinnings, and you know, we can't be too far away from a universal vehicle that everybody uses and just slightly rebodies.
Well, the styles and designs are becoming more and more alike, and that's because it's computer optimized, and what's the best way to go through the air, what's the most aesthetically attractive, and they all turn out looking the same. There goes the OB past our commentary point, and on screen you can see the GPO van there, the little Z-Type, which was built in 1946, and those were the precursor of what became the Series E Morris 8, with its headlamps sunk into the wings. That has separate headlamps, but in GPO van form it was known as the Z. And there are several of those. They were sold off complete with their equipment, all the test equipment, all the handsets. And that gentleman told me that he has an awful lot of that equipment, but he hasn't put it in because, quite frankly, he needed to pack his tent in.
Well, you know, there are certain things that are more important than the defunct test.
The Herald's electric vehicle
Yeah.
going through there. 70 of those were built to run around London with a range of about 60 miles, running on acid batteries. Big photograph there, the OB bus, the OB Bedford, with its body that resembled really the early Charabanc style.
Yes.
Dennis fire engine from Guildford, there it is, 1934 Dennis.
Yes. The Dennis Brothers built a factory or a construction building in the centre of the town in Guildford, which was Britain's first purpose-built motor industry manufacturing plant in the centre of Guildford. Lasted a few years before they had to expand and moved out to the outskirts of town, where they continue to expand and still have an operation.
Leyland bus. These buses and many of the trucks signalled the shift to diesel power at about that time. Gardner was a very, very prominent diesel engine. Leyland built their own and continued to do so for many years, but when you got to AEC and a lot of the other brands, it was always the Gardner power unit, which goes on and on forever. And you still see on our motorways today, particularly the showmen, the fairground people, still run the old AECs and the Scammells and even the guys, you know, and it is just lovely to see those old vehicles, which demonstrates the quality of engineering at the time, that the mechanical equipment has endured.
Now here's a very local bus from the Southdown Company.
Yes, going off to Burpham.
Yeah.
The George and the Dragon at Burpham, very fine hostelry.
There you go, there's local knowledge for you. Now those of you who've been listening to Radio 2 during the week will know that Chris Evans is keeping his bus driver's licence up to date by bringing a bus down after they finish on air right now. So in fact they'll be boarding outside Wogan House and coming down with 10 couples aboard the bus, 5 of whom have been nominated by friends, family or other associates for good deeds and just being thoroughly worthy, and 5 couples who have bid a total of just under £60,000 to ride down for the day, and to be guests of the Goodwood Motor Circuit for the day here at the Revival. So they will be driving into the circuit. They haven't made it here yet. He's only just finished the radio show, so not part of this parade. I'm not quite sure if we're going to see them when they arrive or whatever, but a very fine way to arrive.
Leyland double-decker alongside the Harrods electric vehicle and the OB Bedford behind. And the Southdown bus behind, it's got Southdown on the top of its grille, but it's actually a Leyland Cub.
Now that is a purpose-built vehicle, isn't it? You can see the enormous battery tray underneath.
Such was the technology.
With the wet batteries, yes.
Lead-acid batteries.
Yeah.
But for local deliveries around London,
Yeah.
they're the Thames Trader, long-nosed Trader. Be something like a 3-ton truck.
Yeah, that's the sort that was the film with Stanley Baker. What was it, The Demon Drivers or whatever it was, about all the long-distance truck drivers that were independents vying for jobs and keeping themselves awake with amphetamines through the night.
Before O license, operator's license, before you just could literally buy a commercial vehicle, tax it, and go into business as a haulier.
Yeah. And of course, there were plenty around, particularly in the late 40s, early 50s. Ex-WD vehicles were 10 a penny.
Problem was they were pretty much all petrol.
Yeah.
And, not very cost effective.
The electric van sort of was a pointer to the future, wasn't it?
Yes.
Way back.
Absolutely so.